Sabrina 70s comic, issue 67. The first story continues the trend of getting Hilda wrong because she rants that there has to be something witches can do to solve inflation, pollution, and the energy crisis. This is confusing because she's always been the proudly evil stereotypical witch. Usually people don't lampshade the fact that she's acting out of character, which makes it look like rather than the writers intentionally trying to give her character development from being with Sabrina so much, it's just the writers forgetting or not knowing who she is. After all, if she could change because of Sabrina, what took so long? It should be Zelda. Also, shouldn't it be obvious to all of them that the witches aren't allowed to solve these major problems because they're not allowed to help mortals with their magic? And if they didn't have a policy of non-interference with Earth, Earth would be ruled by witches by now. Della would be against this, and she should know this. She says that there's no spell against inflation. Of course not. Sabrina says that the opposite of inflation is deflation, so they should just wish for deflation. The prices don't change, and instead every tire around here is deflated. Of course. Because that's the only thing she'd think about when thinking of deflation. She couldn't help it. But you'd think magic would know what she wanted. Of course inflation was too tough a problem. They didn't even know why it was happening. Hilda uses magic to clean up the dirty lake. The only way this could backfire is if Della shows up to be an asshole about it for no reason at all, even though it's just one lake. Bullshit! Why would all the trash appear here? The witches are more than capable of making stuff disappear. She could have also transformed it. And I'm pretty sure Sabrina cleaned up the pollution of a lake or river just fine before this. This is the stupidest way to try to fill in a plot hole. She makes the trash disappear into a black hole. Somehow, it gets dumped into the Grand Canyon. Again, this wouldn't happen. She would have told her magic to go to the great landfill in the sky, like Hilda wanted to do to the things in her attic. If it was a black hole for real, it would have sucked up the entire Earth. Or at the very least, it'd spaghetti-ify the trash. The only explanation is that witches spying on Hilda or screwing up her spell because the race is against mortals and want their planet to have problems because of that. Which is depressing. But even then, that makes no sense because I remember Sabrina getting away with getting rid of pollution before with no consequences. This is like a story that's trying to fill in a common plot hole question throughout the series. And it's failing at it miserably. Like how Danny Phantom tried to explain away why they don't destroy the ghost zone, and the explanation was some bullshit that came out of complete nowhere. So I still hated that it wouldn't be destroyed. The answer that I came up with for this question in the first panel was better than this story. I already assumed that Della wouldn't allow witches to try to solve these problems because they weren't already solved. So I don't need this story. In fact, I'm wondering why Della isn't bothering them the whole time for trying to do good. After all the times Hilda made fun of Sabrina for wanting to do good, you'd think Sabrina would be commenting on this, or at least being especially affectionate with her to encourage her to keep it up. Hilda wants to solve the energy crisis, saying that her magic elixir propels brooms on their journeys. She gives some car that's out of gas her elixir, and it causes an explosion, I guess because the car isn't built to handle it. Still, why would there be any sparks? This doesn't properly answer the question of why they can't solve the energy crisis. Magic would supply an almost infinite amount of electricity without any need to use gas and oil. Then again, it's been established in this comic that witches can run out of magic from overuse, and need to recharge for a few days. So witches using magic and power plants to power everything like electricity would exhaust their magic a lot more quickly. I don't know how much more quickly exactly, but they'd have to take breaks to recharge a lot and get filled in for, so multiple witches would have to be hired for just one power plant position. I'm sure there's a ton of witches, so that's not the problem. Witches wouldn't be able to always focus on sending magic out of them for a long time to keep power plants powered. In this comic, they get bored and exhausted. They'd have to put the magic in artifacts of some kind to store them. They'd have to keep recharging, and would have to live like mortals most of the time, and that'd make them want to quit their jobs. But couldn't they just use witches that are seen as disposable? They could use criminal witches from prisons, who wouldn't have the option to quit because it's prison labor, or community service. And they could brainwash them into being nice, like with that peace potion, to discourage them if they could make the magic have a curse in it. If the witches did that, that would work. I can imagine that's how witches in the other realm get their electricity, and all their cars are electric cars. I can imagine they'd have terraformed and taken over tons of planets in the other realm if they're so powerful. So there'd be trillions of witches. For the most part, witches could totally solve the energy crisis. I'm sure witches could throw lightning at will, so that's a lot of energy for a power plant. They just can't change the fact that most cars aren't electric cars. The story ends with Sabrina saying that witches can best help save the world by minding their own business. That's something the head witch should have said. The story could have expanded on these points better. They didn't even tackle why inflation was happening and failed to solve it anyways. In the next story, Sabrina says that she has everything set up perfectly and her slumber party is very important to her. Since when do teenagers have those? She's late. Hilda feels sorry for her for wanting to be accepted as an ordinary teenager, rather than being angry about it. I guess she's nicer now. Then Hilda and Zelda's old friend Sarah flies over to them on a flying broom with her no doubt bratty daughter and says that they have to attend a special witches convention tonight. I want to know what these conventions are like and what the purpose of them is. How does she know they have one? How do they not? She's allowed to leave Esmeralda with Sabrina. Huh, in the 90s comic, Sabrina has a cousin Esmeralda, and she looks like her. Sabrina doesn't want a known brat to spoil her party. Why doesn't she just freeze Esmeralda in time until they get back? She won't mind. She tells Esmeralda to remember that she doesn't want her friends to know they're witches. It doesn't matter because she floats refreshments to these new characters anyways. I thought Betty and Veronica were Sabrina's friends. Sabrina has to lie to her impressed friend that Esmeralda can do magic tricks, but no one would think this was a mere magic trick. It doesn't seem like there's a way to fake this. Sabrina takes away her lolly as a punishment until she behaves. This whole story is Sabrina's fault for not just freezing her and hiding her for the rest of the slumber party. She's a witch. She should act like it. And it wouldn't be cruel because Esmeralda wouldn't be aware the entire time, so she wouldn't be suffering. Esmeralda plays a joke because the sleeping bag's made to snore, because it's called a sleeping bag. Sabrina lies that she's just showing off her ventriloquism. She frustrates me by saying, "One more trick and it'll be the last trick you do. Just punish her already. There's no reason to give her any more chances." Moron. Then the pajamas start dancing, because it's a pajama party. Sabrina lies that it's all done with mirrors, and she says that her magic is more powerful than Esmeralda's. It is? I thought she was a half-witch. Is that only a 90s thing? I mean, why else would she have aged up to teenagedom at the same speed as Harvey? Rather than simply freezing her in time, she commands her to fly around their home on a broomstick until her Aunt Sarah would return. Hilda comes back Sarah already. It's not midnight. Sabrina sobs, saying that Esmeralda ruined her party, but her friends think it's the best one they've ever been to, and Esmeralda's a laugh riot. No wonder they made Esmeralda her cousin later. Hilda says Sabrina owes Esmeralda an apology. This seems unfair because Sabrina's incredibly lucky that Esmeralda's magic didn't ruin her party by terrifying her friends. She was very lucky that her friends were complete airheads, and I figured that just one more spell would have made them catch on. Sabrina gives Esmeralda a giant sucker to last for a month and tells her to come back soon. Yeah, reward her for disobeying you. In the next story, Hilda's mad that Sabrina's bringing home a mangy stray dog into her house. Hilda tells her to bring it to a dog shelter because she doesn't want him in her house. Considering that the last dog in the house did nothing but howl, who can blame her? Sabrina justifies that the shelter isn't open on Sundays. Wait, why? Sabrina says that she'll bring him in the morning and they'll probably find out where he belongs, unless they don't. Hilda says that he might have fleas and should be taken to the police station. He hugs her leg, probably sucking up to her since he'd have no reason to like her, and she says that he can at least stay for one night. He still wants to be near her when she tries to go upstairs, and he goes in her bed. She zaps up a dog bed, and when she zaps up dog food for him, he still sleeps in her bed, like a person instead of like a dog. She pushes him out of the bed, and then he points while standing up. This isn't Scooby-Doo. How could a dog not from the other realm do this? We're supposed to believe that the non-witches are normal. It's already 2 in the morning? Why doesn't this comic have text boxes indicating the exact amount of time skipped ahead more often? Archie Sonic always does. He doesn't want to go out because it's raining, so she zaps it away. I wonder if that'll have consequences. Nope. The story ends with her being complimented as a humanitarian for sleeping like a dog on her bed. Logically, she would have just zapped up a second bed. It was really nice of Hilda to be like this for the dog the whole story. It took advantage of her surprising soft side, but it'd make more sense if it was Ambrose or Sabrina instead. In the next story, some old witches in the Supreme Witches' headquarters are saying that the planet Isis is about to enter the orbit of Gastrixia. What planet? You mean the moon? Also, isn't that name associated with some evil organization? I guess that's where they got the name from. Maybe they're talking about a planet from another galaxy, which is interesting. Right away I thought that this text bubble is making this comic much more interesting, as some witches are discussing some planets we've never heard of before. Anyways, whenever this happens, all the spells of witches get fouled up for 24 hours. Why? That doesn't make any sense. Those planets are in the other realm, not Earth. I really wish this was explained, because it makes the story look stupid. It'd make more sense if some spiteful group of witches cast a spell and every witch has a curse, because their own lives sucked. Della's told that everyone was warned about this except Hilda because her hexaphone is out of order. How would she be the only one whose hexaphone was out of order? Won't someone just warp to her and warn her? Out of nowhere, Della says that Hilda and her gang are unimportant. You mean family? And if they're unimportant, why do you visit Sabrina for no reason like every week? This makes the entire story feel even more forced. Della will just warp to them and warn them. Because it's cold, Hilda wants to throw another log on the fireplace, but they're out of logs. Why don't they have indoor heating? They want to be relying on a fireplace. Zelda tries to zap up warm winter clothes, and her magic somehow thinks to give her the opposite, flimsy bikinis and sandals. This would only make sense if their magic was being overwhelmed by the magic of a more powerful witch. Hilda wants to toss the things into the fireplace because they're useless right now, which is short-sighted. Sabrina suggests warping to a place where they could use those bikinis. Normally that'd be smart, but she warps to the North Pole with them. Zelda says it's colder than the inside of Della's heart. She deserved that. Except that makes me wonder why she keeps changing her mind about punishing Sabrina. Hilda tries to zap up hot treats and just gets a fridge with popsicles. Sabrina comes up with the idea that if all their spells are backfiring, they should wish for the opposite of what they want. And her aunts think she's being stupid. It should be the other way around. I'd expect Zelda to be the smartest one. They should have come up with this idea earlier. Sabrina casts a spell that gets them sent home, and now they get a message that explains why their spells went awry. So who fixed their hexaphone? If it's not from the hexaphone, why didn't she get this mail earlier? The story ends with Sabrina appreciating how it's warmer in Riverdale than the North Pole. The first story is about trying to incorrectly fill in a plot hole by explaining why witches can't solve inflation, pollution, and the energy crisis. I always assumed it was because Della wouldn't let witches do that, since she's evil and that'd be interfering in Earth's history. Aside from, I guess, the energy crisis, because that car wasn't built to run on elixir, the story left a sour taste by not elaborating deeply enough and failed at explaining it away, considering that it wasn't simply explained right away that Della wouldn't let witches do this. Hilda can't solve inflation because she doesn't know the cause of it. And this is before the internet. She has no way of finding out the cause of it. But it was total bullshit that they couldn't actually get rid of the pollution. I would have settled for an explanation that they can only get rid of the pollution that's immediately in front of them, and there's just too much. But instead, the witches keep failing to make it disappear when they make stuff disappear and transform all the time. Obviously, if they just changed the prices directly in front of them, then the shopkeepers would question it and change them back. And there was a better way to address the energy crisis dilemma. While magic is clean, sustainable, and effortless energy, witches don't have infinite magic in this comic. They need to recharge after a while with a battery in their house, or by outright giving up their battery for 3 days. Most witches don't want to exhaust all their magic giving it to power plants and would have to be forced into it, more likely. They could have explained that instead of showing Hilda as an idiot who doesn't understand how gas-powered cars would obviously work. Also, why was Hilda the one behind this instead of Sabrina? I could get behind her having character development, but that needs to be explained or I'll just be confused. It'd be like if Eggman was acting good. In the second story, a bratty girl named Esmeralda keeps ignoring Sabrina's desire to not be found out as a witch and revealing her magic to her new friends at a slumber party as a joke, without explaining that she could just erase their memories and so it doesn't matter what she does. But surprisingly, her friends are as dumb as rocks and assume she's doing magic tricks and find her hilarious. Sabrina's expected to apologize to her for doing what she logically should have done right away, when she was very lucky things worked out for her. Stuff was floating in front of them, for Pete's sake. A spell could have been cast on them to make them gullible, and I really want to know what these witches' conventions are. Jury duty would make a lot more sense instead of sounding arbitrary. Then there's a story where a stray dog acts confusingly human by trying to insist on sleeping in Hilda's bed like a human. And she only puts up with him so much because he sucks up to her and insists on being with her, even though she hated him from the start. At least showed her soft side, but it was so confusing of her. Wouldn't she have just zapped up a second bed? The fourth story was interesting, but they could have had a much better explanation for why all the witches' spells were backfiring. And it'd make more sense if it was just Sabrina's immediate family being affected by a curse put on them by a bunch of other witches. Della could have been punishing them, but even that would be annoying. Instead, she wanted to warn them, but somehow the hexaphone was faulty in just one house. It was interesting to see them warp to the North Pole when they were trying to get warmer. And I liked that they finally had the idea to just cast a spell for the opposite of what they really want, to game the system and use magic anyways. Wouldn't every witch figure this out? Wouldn't they have figured this out a lot earlier? So it wouldn't matter all that much unless they had to use magic really quickly on the fly. How can a planet entering an orbit in another universe screw up all the spells? Aren't there trillions of witches out there? That's some range.